The twin suns of Ilyara Prime painted the sky in gold and violet. The great city of Cyratha shimmered under the light, its silver towers rising like blades against the horizon. It was a world known for diplomacy, a place where thousands of alien voices met to speak of peace. And yet, even in that place of calm, Ambassador Saren of the Vulpine Concord felt uneasy. The humans were coming. For months, the name Terran Union had been whispered through council halls and corridors. Some said they were brave explorers. Others said they were reckless savages. No one truly knew which was true. The Vulpines, elegant and calculating by nature, feared what they did not understand. Saren had studied every report she could find about humans. They were unpredictable, emotional, and stubborn, 3 traits her kind found deeply troubling. To her people, diplomacy meant logic, patience, and control. Humans, it seemed, were chaos given shape, and yet, deep inside, Saren felt something more than fear. She felt curiosity. When the Terran ship descended through Ilyara's atmosphere, a hush fell across the landing field. The air shimmered as the engines cooled and the metallic door slid open with a hiss. A group of humans stepped out, their boots clicking against the marble floor. At their front walked a tall man with tired eyes and a warm smile. "Captain Marcus Hale," he said, bowing slightly, "representative of the Terran Union. It's an honor to finally meet the Vulpine Concord." Saren studied him carefully. He didn't look like the soldiers she had seen in the records. His uniform was worn, his hair streaked with gray, and his face carried the calm of someone who had seen too much and still found reason to hope. "Ambassador Saren," she replied with polite formality. "The honor is mutual." Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. His gaze wasn't cold or defensive. It was open, genuine. Later that evening, during the welcome ceremony, Saren observed the humans as they mingled among alien diplomats. They laughed easily, shared food, told stories, and seemed entirely unbothered by the heavy tension in the room. Most other species moved with restraint, careful of every gesture. The humans, they simply were. When Saren joined Marcus at the balcony overlooking the glowing city, he was leaning against the railing, looking at the stars. "Your world is beautiful," he said softly. "I've never seen colors like these." "It is," Saren replied, standing beside him. "But beauty means little if it hides fear beneath it." Marcus turned to her, a hint of sadness in his smile. "You sound like someone who's seen both." "I have," she admitted. "The Concord has kept peace for centuries. We learned that emotion clouds reason. It makes one weak," he chuckled quietly. "Funny. On Earth we say emotion gives reason meaning. Without it, why fight for peace at all?" His words lingered in her mind like music she didn't understand. No other diplomat had ever spoken like that. They all came armed with logic and strategy. Marcus came with something far simpler: sincerity. As the evening went on, Saren found herself speaking more freely. She told him of her home province, her studies, her fears of war. Marcus listened without interruption. When she paused, unsure why she had shared so much, he said gently, "Sometimes the hardest part of peace isn't negotiating with others, and it's learning to trust them." That night, when Saren returned to her quarters, she couldn't sleep. The stars outside her window shimmered like fragments of thought. Why did his words affect her so deeply? He was human, impulsive, emotional, everything she was trained to avoid. And yet he carried something she could not name. The next morning she met him again in the council chamber. The talks began, and the other delegates argued endlessly about numbers, trade routes, and territorial rights. But when Marcus spoke, everyone fell silent. He didn't speak like a diplomat. He spoke like someone who believed peace was possible. Saren watched him, captivated despite herself. She had spent her life surrounded by minds that valued precision over passion. But here stood a man who spoke from the heart, and somehow that made his words stronger than any argument. As the session ended, Marcus approached her once more. "Thank you for listening," he said kindly. "I know humans can be overwhelming." Saren found herself smiling, a small, genuine smile she hadn't given anyone in years. "Overwhelming, yes," she replied. "But not unwelcome," he laughed softly. "Then maybe there's hope for us yet." When he walked away, Saren remained still for a long time. The warm echo of his voice stayed with her. like a flame that refused to go out. She didn't know it yet, but that single meeting, that quiet conversation, under Ilyara's twin sons, would change her life forever. It was the first time she truly saw what it meant to be human, and the first time she began to wonder if emotion might not be weakness after all. Weeks turned into months on Ilyara Prime, and the humans became a constant presence in the diplomatic halls. At first, many of the Vulpine officials treated them with careful politeness, the kind reserved for dangerous creatures. But to Saren's surprise, the humans never acted as expected. They were loud at times, yes, emotional, but they were also kind. They remembered names, shared jokes, and treated everyone, no matter their species, like equals. It was strange, even unsettling to the Vulpines who had built their culture on hierarchy and restraint. Saren watched all of this with growing curiosity. And among all the humans, Captain Marcus Hale stood out. He wasn't just the leader of the Terran team. He was the heart of it. When debates grew tense, he had a way of diffusing anger with humor. When others argued over details, he reminded them of purpose. And when Saren struggled to understand the chaos of human behavior, Marcus was there to guide her gently through it. One late evening, after a long day of failed negotiations, Saren sat alone in the garden dome. The glass walls shimmered with reflections of distant stars. Her tail curled tightly as she tried to calm her restless thoughts. Marcus found her there, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. "You looked like you needed this," he said, handing one to her. She accepted it hesitantly. "You humans always assume comfort can be found in simple things." He smiled. "Sometimes it can." He sat beside her, gazing at the stars. "You know, back on Earth, we used to look up at the night sky and wonder if we were alone. Now that we know we're not, we spend all our time arguing." Saren's ears twitched in amusement. "Perhaps that is what happens when one's dreams come true. They stop feeling like dreams." Marcus chuckled softly. "Maybe, but I think it's because peace is harder than war. War has clear enemies. Peace makes everyone face themselves." She turned her gaze toward him, thoughtful. "You speak as though you've seen both." "I have," he said quietly. "Lost friends on both sides of conflicts that should never have happened." There was a silence between them, heavy but gentle. For a moment, Saren saw something in his eyes, a sadness he carried quietly, like a scar that would never heal. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them expected. They started spending more time together, reviewing agreements, walking the gardens, even sharing meals. Marcus often told stories about Earth, about oceans that stretched endlessly, forests full of life, and the smell of rain on old stone streets. Saren listened with fascination. The Vulpines had beautiful worlds, yes, but they were controlled. Every tree grown for purpose, every storm managed by weather grids. Humanity, it seemed, lived with nature instead of above it. They embraced its chaos. Once during a private meeting, Saren asked, "Why do humans risk so much for others? Even those they barely know?" Marcus looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because someone has to. The universe is too cold already. If we don't care for each other, what's the point of surviving?" His words struck something deep within her. She had been raised to believe that emotion weakened judgment, that compassion was dangerous. But here was a man who proved the opposite. His empathy didn't make him weak. It made him strong, and yet the alliance remained fragile. Many among the Vulpine Council whispered that humans couldn't be trusted. Some feared their passion. Others envied their adaptability. Every small disagreement became fuel for suspicion. When a trade dispute nearly collapsed the talks, it was Marcus who held the peace together. He stood before both councils and said, "Every time we let fear guide us, we take a step backward. I didn't come here to build walls. I came here to build bridges." The room fell silent. Even Saren felt her heart tremble at his conviction. His voice carried no arrogance, only truth. After the meeting, she approached him quietly. "You risked your position by saying that." Marcus smiled faintly. "Peace is always a risk worth taking." As they walked down the empty corridor, their steps echoed softly. Saren realized something unsettling. She didn't see Marcus as just a human anymore. She saw him as Marcus, the person who made her think differently, who showed her warmth in a world built on restraint. And though she didn't yet understand it, that bond, fragile, delicate, and unspoken, would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. For beyond the shining towers of Ilyara, shadows were moving. Enemies of peace were waiting, and destiny was quietly preparing the moment that would change both their lives forever. Peace was never easy to keep. For months, the talks between the Vulpine Concord and the Terran Union had been moving forward, slow but steady. Agreements were being signed, trade was opening, and trust was beginning to grow. It felt like the start of something beautiful, something real. But peace has enemies. And that truth came crashing down one bright morning. The summit was held aboard Station Thalos, a massive diplomatic hub floating between the two empires. It was meant to symbolize unity, a place where no weapon was allowed, no soldier permitted, only words and hope. Ambassador Saren stood beside Captain Marcus Hale as they walked into the grand chamber. The air shimmered with light from dozens of alien species. The walls hummed softly, filled with the sound of translators working in 100 languages. It should have been a day of celebration. Instead, it became a day of fire. The first explosion came from the lower decks, a thunderous roar that shook the station. The floor trembled under their feet as alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the walls and screams filled the hall. Saren's ears flattened, her heart racing. "What's happening?" she shouted. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind a pillar. "Dravik Collective," he said, voice tense. "Terrorists. They've been against the Alliance since the beginning." The doors burst open. Smoke poured in. Vulpine guards rushed forward, but laser fire cut through them like lightning. Panic spread. Ambassadors ran in every direction. Marcus moved fast. Too fast for someone in a diplomat's uniform. He barked orders, rallying frightened guards, sealing corridors, helping wounded beings to safety. Saren followed him through the chaos, her elegant composure gone. She had never seen war, not up close. The smell of burning metal filled her lungs. They reached the docking ring where evacuation shuttles waited. But one of the blast doors had jammed. A group of civilians, mostly aides and young envoys, were trapped on the far side, pounding against the glass. Flames crept closer. Saren turned to Marcus. "We have to help them." He nodded once, no hesitation. "Stay here," he said. "If the door closes, seal it." Before she could protest, he ran into the smoke. "Marcus," she cried, but he was already gone. Minutes felt like hours. The corridor roared with fire and debris. Through the haze, she saw his silhouette dragging people toward the exit. One by one, he pushed them through. His arm was bleeding, his face covered in soot, but he didn't stop. A small Vulpine child clung to him, terrified. Marcus handed the child to Saren just as another explosion tore through the ceiling. The blast threw him to the ground. She screamed his name, "Marcus, come back." He looked up, coughing, and saw the door beginning to close. The emergency system had triggered. Once sealed, it would never reopen. Saren's eyes widened in horror. "Marcus, no. You'll be trapped." He stood limping and shoved the last survivor, a human technician, and toward the door. Then he looked at her. Even through the chaos, his smile was calm. "Saren," he said softly, voice trembling through the comms. "Tell them it was worth it." Before she could reach him, the blast doors sealed shut. The sound echoed like thunder in her heart. The fire swallowed the corridor. The communication link went silent. And with it, Marcus Hale was gone. For a long time, Saren couldn't move. She just stared at the sealed door, shaking, tears streaming down her furred cheeks. Her claws dug into the floor as if she could tear it open with her will alone. Guards pulled her away as smoke filled the air. Her voice broke as she whispered his name again and again, hoping somehow he could still hear her. When the rescue teams finally arrived, they found over 100 survivors, Vulpines, humans, and others, all alive because of one man, Captain Marcus Hale. But of him there was no sign. Only wreckage, only silence. That night, the fires of Station Thalos burned like a second sun in the void. Saren watched from the rescue ship window, her reflection pale against the glass. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had already fallen. She just sat there whispering to the stars. "You said peace was worth any risk. You never said the cost would be you." And as the wreck of Thalos drifted quietly into the darkness, something inside her heart changed forever. She had seen many diplomats, many soldiers, many leaders, but only one human who believed that saving others mattered more than his own life. The galaxy would remember the explosion as an act of terror, but Saren would remember it as the moment a single human sacrifice turned fear into faith. The fires of Station Thalos had long gone out, but their light still burned in Saren's heart. Days turned into weeks, and the galaxy mourned. News channels across dozens of systems spoke the same words: the human captain's heroic sacrifice. His name was repeated on every frequency. Marcus Hale, the man who gave his life to save others. But Saren could not bring herself to listen. She stayed on Ilyara Prime, confined to her quarters, her once bright eyes now dim. The council sent condolences, humans sent medals, and diplomats sent speeches filled with hollow praise. Yet none of it brought peace. Peace, she thought, was supposed to feel calm, but this peace felt heavy, sharp, and lonely. She would sit by the balcony at night, staring at the stars, remembering the way Marcus had smiled that first day they met, how warm his voice had been, how steady his presence felt. The memory was both comfort and torment. Her assistant, a young Vulpine named Lyra, often came to check on her. "Ambassador," Lyra said softly one evening, "they are holding a memorial for the captain tomorrow. The humans have asked if you would speak." Saren didn't answer. Her claws traced the edge of her teacup as she whispered, "What can I say that matters? That I watched him die while I stood behind a sealed door?" Lyra hesitated, then placed a small hollow device on the table. They recovered this from the wreckage. It was found near where the captain was last seen. The hologram flickered to life, revealing a recording, grainy, half-broken, but clear enough to see Marcus's tired smile. His voice crackled through the static. "If anyone finds this, tell Saren that it was worth it. Tell her the Alliance matters. Don't let fear win." Saren covered her mouth, trying to hold back the sound that escaped her, a quiet, broken sob. Her hands trembled as the image faded. That night she made her decision. The next day, the Grand Hall of Ilyara was filled with beings from across the stars. The memorial had brought together hundreds, humans, Vulpines, and others. At the center stood a tall silver monument shaped like two hands reaching toward each other but never quite touching. Saren walked onto the stage in silence. She wore no royal colors, no symbols of rank, only a simple gray robe. The hall quieted as she looked at the crowd, then at the monument, and finally at the flag of the Terran Union. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "Marcus Hale was not born on our world," she began. "He was not of our kind nor bound by our traditions. Yet he gave his life to protect us, not because duty demanded it, but because his heart did." She paused, her voice shaking slightly. "We Vulpines are taught that emotion clouds judgment. That logic alone leads to peace. But this human, he showed us that peace cannot exist without compassion." The hall was silent except for the faint hum of the lights above. Saren took a breath and continued. "He once told me that peace is harder than war. I understand that now. Because peace demands trust. It demands sacrifice. It demands that we believe in each other, even when it hurts." Her eyes glistened. Marcus believed. And because he did, I will spend the rest of my life making sure that belief was not in vain. As she stepped down, the humans in the front row rose to their feet. Slowly others followed. Vulpines, traders, diplomats, all standing together in quiet respect. For the first time in history, the Hall of Ilyara echoed with something more powerful than speeches. It echoed with unity. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Saren remained alone beside the monument. The stars above shimmered softly, reflected in the smooth silver surface. She placed a small pendant, the insignia of the Terran Union, at its base. Her whisper was barely audible. "You once told me someone has to stand up for others, even if it costs everything. I understand now." The night breeze brushed against her fur, gentle as a farewell. She closed her eyes and let herself cry, not out of grief but gratitude, because Marcus Hale had done more than save lives. He had changed hearts, and though his voice was gone, his message remained. In the quiet of that starlit night, Saren made a vow, a promise to carry his memory forward, to build the peace he believed in, and to never again mistake emotion for weakness. From that moment, she was no longer just a diplomat of the Vulpine conquered. She was the keeper of a human's legacy, a legacy that had been written not with words, but with sacrifice. The seasons on Ilyara Prime shifted slowly, marked not by weather but by the color of its twin suns. Months passed since the tragedy of Station Thalos, but for Ambassador Saren, time had lost its meaning. The world around her returned to motion. Meetings resumed. Councils gathered. Trade ships moved once more through the stars. Life as it always did continued. But Saren, she was no longer the same. She found herself changed in ways she couldn't explain. The calm, logical tone that once defined her speech now carried warmth. The cold, careful mask she wore in every meeting had begun to crack, revealing something gentler beneath. Her people noticed it too. During one council session, a fellow Vulpine delegate whispered, "You have become too human. Saren, you speak with emotion now. It makes you weak." She didn't answer at first. She simply looked at him and smiled softly. "Then perhaps weakness is what we have been missing." The council fell silent. No one dared to argue further. Everywhere she went, she carried Marcus Hale's name like a quiet flame in her heart. She often replayed his last words in her mind. Tell them it was worth it. Those words had become her strength. She began proposing new programs. Cultural exchanges between Vulpines and humans. Joint academies for young diplomats, humanitarian aid missions. Many resisted at first, suspicious and afraid. But Saren's passion was relentless. Peace is not built on fear, she told them. It is built on understanding. And understanding begins when we stop looking at each other as strangers. It wasn't the kind of speech Vulpines were used to hearing. They preferred logic, numbers, and plans. But her words carried something stronger: truth. And truth has a way of reaching hearts even when minds resist. Her new approach soon began to change others. Human and Vulpine workers started volunteering together on relief projects. Trade increased. Cultural events were held where laughter replaced caution. Slowly, the wall between their species began to fade. One evening, as Saren walked through the gardens of the Vulpine embassy, she noticed something unusual. A group of young Vulpines were sitting under the silver trees, listening to a human musician playing a soft tune on a small wooden instrument. The melody floated through the air like a memory. Saren stopped to listen. The song reminded her of Marcus, calm, brave, endlessly hopeful. She closed her eyes, feeling warmth in her chest. "Ambassador?" one of the young Vulpines called. "Is it true?" The human captain who died. "He was your friend?" Saren opened her eyes and nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "He was my friend, and he was a better diplomat than I ever was." The young ones looked surprised, but he wasn't Vulpine. How could he be a diplomat of peace? She smiled faintly. Because peace doesn't belong to one species. It belongs to those who choose to believe in it. That night, when she returned to her quarters, she stood by the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, she imagined, was the place where his atoms had joined the universe, scattered across the void yet still shining. She whispered softly, "You were right, Marcus. Emotion gives meaning to reason." Her reflection in the glass looked different now, stronger, softer. She realized she no longer carried just grief. She carried purpose. In the months that followed, she became known across both empires as the voice of two worlds. Her words inspired many, not through power but through sincerity. The humans admired her courage. The Vulpines respected her transformation. But despite all the praise, Saren never sought fame. Every speech she gave, every treaty she signed, every bridge she built between species, it was all for one reason: to honor him. Sometimes when she felt tired, she would visit the monument again. She'd sit beneath the silver hands reaching toward each other and close her eyes. The whispers of the crowd, the rustle of the wind, it all faded until she could almost hear his voice again. "You're doing fine, Saren," it would say in her mind. "Keep going." And she would smile just as she did the night they met on the balcony, under Ilyara's twin sons. Marcus Hale was gone, but his spirit had become part of her voice, her choices, her every breath. He had taught her that peace is not a word to be spoken, but a promise to be lived, and through her, that promise continued to grow. One heart, one world, one act of kindness at a time. The human was gone, but his light had not faded. It now lived in the Vulpine who had learned through his sacrifice what it truly meant to feel. 10 years had passed since the fire on Station Thalos. The galaxy had changed. The Vulpine Concord and the Terran Union were no longer distant powers. They were partners. Together they had built schools, trade routes, and new colonies where different species lived side by side. What began as a fragile dream had become a living truth, and at the heart of that dream stood Ambassador Saren Vera. She was older now. The once bright orange of her fur had turned to a softer shade of gold. The sharpness in her eyes had been replaced by a calm, deep warmth, the kind that comes from understanding both joy and loss. Her name was now known across the stars, spoken with respect. But for all her achievements, Saren never took pride in her fame, because in her heart, she knew whose name truly deserved to be remembered. She had come to Earth, Terra, as the humans called it, for the 10th anniversary of the Human-Vulpine Alliance. The air was different here, heavier, filled with the smell of rain and soil. For a moment, as she stepped out of her ship, she thought she could almost feel Marcus Hale beside her. The ceremony was held in the Garden of Nations, a vast open field surrounded by trees and fountains. At its center stood a monument, tall, elegant, and simple. It was a statue of a human man reaching forward with one hand as if offering peace. The other hand, unfinished, extended toward a second figure, a Vulpine Diplomat holding it gently. It was a sculpture of them. Saren stood before it in silence. A soft wind brushed through the trees, carrying the faint sound of human children laughing nearby. It felt strange, beautiful but painful. She held a small silver pendant in her hand, Marcus's insignia, recovered from the wreckage years ago. She had kept it close ever since. It was the last piece of him that existed. When it was her turn to speak, the crowd fell quiet. She looked out at them, hundreds of faces, human and alien alike, and then up at the monument. 10 years ago, she began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. A man stood in the middle of fire and chaos. He could have saved himself, but instead he chose to save others. Many of those people stand here today, alive because of him. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not stop. Marcus Hale was not a soldier that day. He was not even acting as a diplomat. He was something far greater. He was human. The humans in the audience lowered their heads, their eyes shining. The Vulpines beside them stood quietly listening. I used to believe emotion made us weak, Saren continued, but I learned that emotion gives us strength. Logic builds walls. Empathy builds bridges. And this man, this human, built a bridge that no one has been able to destroy. She paused, touching the pendant in her hand. He once told me that peace is worth any risk. I finally understand what he meant. Peace is not made by treaties. It is made by hearts willing to trust even when they've been broken. Her voice softened, barely above a whisper. If Marcus could see us now, I think he would smile. She placed the pendant at the foot of the monument and stepped back. The wind grew gentle, almost as if the universe itself had paused to listen. The crowd erupted into applause, not loud or wild, but soft, respectful, filled with gratitude. After the ceremony ended, Saren remained behind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm colors. She sat on a nearby bench watching the light reflect off the statue's metal surface. A young human diplomat approached her, a woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Ambassador Saren," she said softly. "I grew up hearing stories about Captain Hale. He was my mother's commander. She said he believed in you more than anyone." Saren smiled, her heart tightening. "He believed in everyone," she said. "That was his greatest gift." The young woman nodded. "He changed the way we see peace. You both did." As the woman walked away, Saren looked up at the evening sky. The first stars began to appear, glimmering faintly above the horizon. "Do you see it, Marcus?" she whispered. "We did it. Your dream lives on." The night breeze brushed against her face, soft and warm, almost like an answer. And for the first time in many years, Saren felt peace. Real peace. Not the kind signed in treaties, but the kind born from sacrifice, friendship, and love that transcends time and species. Marcus Hale was gone, but his spirit lingered in every alliance, every smile, every moment of unity across the stars. He had given his life for peace, and through Saren, his light had spread across galaxies. The stars above shimmered brighter, as if the universe itself bowed in silent respect to the human who had changed it forever. Years passed, but the story of Marcus Hale never faded. Children across human and Vulpine worlds studied his name in history books. Artists painted scenes of his bravery. Soldiers repeated his words before going into battle, and diplomats, from every corner of the galaxy, quoted his message whenever peace talks began. But for Saren Vera, his story was not just history. It was a heartbeat that lived inside her every day. She had retired from politics now. The galaxy no longer needed her voice as it once had. Others had taken her place. Younger leaders who grew up in the world Marcus had dreamed of. But they still visited her often, seeking advice, or simply to listen to the stories she told in her gentle, wise tone. She lived in a quiet home on Arendor, a green Vulpine colony where humans and Vulpines shared the same streets, the same laughter, and even the same schools. It was once a mining world, broken and gray, but now it was filled with gardens and lights. Humans planted trees there and Vulpines built libraries. Together they had made beauty where there had once been only dust. Every evening Saren would sit by her window, watching the twin moons rise above the hills. The soft light reflected off her fur, and sometimes she would talk softly into the night, as if Marcus could still hear her. One evening, as the cool wind brushed through her home, a visitor arrived. It was a young human boy, no more than 12, wearing a clean academy uniform and holding a small data tablet. His eyes were full of curiosity. "Ambassador Vera?" he asked nervously. Saren smiled kindly. "Just Saren now. What brings you here, young one?" "I'm doing a project for school," he said. "It's about the first human-Vulpine alliance. My teacher told me you knew Captain Marcus Hale. Is that true?" Saren's heart tightened. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew him very well." The boy sat down on the floor beside her chair, eyes wide with wonder. "They say he was fearless, that he saved hundreds. My grandfather said humans used to be very different before the war, angry, divided. But Captain Hale changed everything." Saren smiled faintly. "He was fearless, yes," she said, "but not because he wasn't afraid. He was fearless because he cared, and even when it hurt. That's what made him special." The boy tilted his head. "Did you love him?" Saren looked out the window for a long moment. The moons were bright tonight. "In my own way," she said softly. "Not the kind of love people write songs about, but something deeper. He showed me what it means to believe in others, to believe in hope." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "I want to be like him someday," he said. Saren chuckled, a soft sound like wind through leaves. "Then remember this, little one. Being like him doesn't mean fighting or dying for others. It means living for them, helping, understanding, forgiving." He smiled shyly. "Thank you, Saren." Before he left, he handed her a small metal badge, shaped like a star, the same kind worn by peace cadets. "For you," he said, "to remind you that his story lives on." Saren held it gently, her eyes shimmering. "It already does," she whispered. "In you." When the boy left, the house became quiet again. She sat there for a long time, holding the little star. It glowed faintly in the moonlight. She closed her eyes, remembering the human who had stood beside her in the flames so many years ago. His laughter, his courage, his words. And then, something strange happened. The lights in her garden flickered, just for a moment, and she heard a soft, familiar voice carried by the wind. "You kept your promise, Saren." She opened her eyes quickly, but there was no one there, only the night, the stars, and the whisper of leaves. Yet her heart felt warm, warmer than it had in years. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "I did, Marcus," she said softly. "We did." Outside, children's laughter echoed in the distance. Human and Vulpine voices mixed together, indistinguishable in their joy. It was the sound of a future built from sacrifice, trust, and friendship. Saren leaned back, closing her eyes as the night wrapped around her like a blanket. Somewhere out there, among the stars, she liked to believe Marcus Hale was watching, proud of what they had built. Proud that his choice, that one moment of courage, had changed an entire galaxy. The stars shone brighter that night, as if the universe itself remembered him too. And in the quiet peace of her home, the great diplomat of two worlds smiled one last time, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because love, she finally understood, does not fade. It becomes the light that guides others home. The end.